being videoed. Thanks for coming. I'll test out the volume. It's there. We're good? All right. Well, thank you so much for coming. Thank you for the panel for joining us. In full transparency, this was a lot of hard work by Vicki and Andy and Paulina and Giselle, and then I'm standing in at the last minute because Vicki couldn't make it. So I deserve zero credit for this wonderful event, but I have the honor to go ahead and kick it off. So the RetailMeNot's Women's ERG, as well as the Tech Diversity ERG, in collaboration with the AnitaB.Org organization, have been working on a multi-part series for women in tech. This one tonight is all about how to get into management. So we're really excited to bring in some managers to give you insight on what their journey has looked like, what some of those learnings have been, the difficulties, the challenges, the rewards, and everything fun that management brings. So we're really excited to have some time. And this panel that we have up here tonight is going to be moderated by Giselle Valenzuela Aldrich. And she's a founder and principal consultant at Calassians Consulting, and also one of the community leaders for the AnitaB.Org organization here in Austin. Giselle has been a software engineer for more than 15 years. She holds a bachelor's in computer science from Florida State with a math minor. And I'm a Gator fan, so we've already talked through that little thing. So go Gators. But with that, I will...
Thank you. So just to kind of go over a little bit about what AnitaB.Org does. So we are an organization that is focused on the recruiting, retaining, and advancement of women in technology. And our primary goal is to have 50% of technological roles be filled by women. I know we're not there yet, but we are working on it. So part of our, this series fits into that goal by introducing women to the concept of different roles that they can move into as they progress in their technical careers. And so today we're going to have our three panelists, Laura Kelso, Betsy Sheldon, and Michelle Skupin from RetailMeNot, who have been gracious enough to be willing to talk to us about their journeys in management. I'd also like to make sure that we thank our volunteers. Without you guys, we can't run these kinds of events. So thank you. Please give them a round of applause. And I'd also like to thank RetailMeNot for sponsoring this event, providing this space that we're using, and for the food and drinks that you graciously provided. So let's get into our conversation then. Okay, so as mentioned before, AnitaB.Org has the mission of trying to fill 50% of all technological roles with women. And as such, we're trying to fill the pipeline with women through recruiting and the retainment and advancement of the women that are currently in technology. I'm hoping that we can accomplish several things with this particular panel. One is to give you all in the audience ideas on how to move into management if you've never considered it, or if you have considered it but just don't know how to move in that direction. Also, I'd like to encourage you to not just consider it for yourselves, but if you see traits in women that you work with that you find are leadership traits, I would encourage you to tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, I think that you would be great in management, and have them consider it as well. Lastly, I'd like for us to encourage our companies to put programs together to identify potential in women and give them, groom them for management or executive tracks. Okay. So first question for you ladies. So according to the Harvard Business Review, out of 57 female CEOs interviewed, only 5 wanted to be CEO. 2/3 of them have never even realized they could be CEO until someone tapped them on the shoulder and told them they could be. Were you actively seeking to become managers, or did someone else tap you and say, I think that you would make great management material?
Well, since I'm holding the mic, I can kick it off. My first foray into management was somewhat haphazard, I would say. I was in my kind of late 20s, and I had finished graduate school. I had worked in telecom for a couple of years, and I co-founded a company with a friend of mine called ubundle.com. We together raised just shy of $1 million from friends and family, and built this business that helped consumers match up with telecom service providers that fit their needs. And with that, with that raise in money, I found myself managing about 15 people. And so I would say, not fully prepared, but it was a great experience, and it gave me a taste of what it was like to be a manager, and I learned a ton. I always tell people it was like getting an MBA. I then went, after that experience, I went back to being an individual contributor, and I would say the course of my career has gone back and forth between individual contributor to manager. But that was sort of my first experience with management.
I would say similarly to Laura, I also was haphazardly asked to become a manager. So similar to the situation that you had outlined, I was tapped, but I hadn't ever thought about it, to be honest, until the situation had presented itself, and a manager that was ready to move on to a different opportunity needed to backfill her space and identified me as the candidate. So I was lucky that she considered me at the time, because I hadn't thought about it. And once the question was raised, it took me a second. I was caught off guard. But I was like, I'm never going to learn anything if I don't try. So I tried, and I haven't turned back.
For me, my first role as a manager came with a new role at a new company when I changed jobs. And so I think when I was hired to do that job, I think it was understood that I would be hiring. And so so I was, I guess, sort of tapped in the fact that I was offered the role.
Okay, so I think the lesson learned here is we should encourage each other. We see traits that we think are leadership material. Let's encourage that in other women, because I feel that for the most part, we don't see it in ourselves that easily. So that's my takeaway from that answer. Thank you, ladies. So advice for audience members, if they are individual contributors today, but they are considering going into management, what's the first thing you think that they should do?
It's a great question. I think, you know, sometimes your move into management kind of comes out of necessity. So if you can be able to be proactive about it and talk to your leadership, not just your direct manager, but also those around you who can help you, you know, make those next moves. So,
to Michelle's point of making your next moves, I would say the piece of advice I would give is actually to seek advice and find your network, find people that you trust in or see that are doing leadership positions well today, tap them. Because I think if there's anything that I've learned in management is that you've never seen every situation, and experience comes with time. And so you're not going to have the answers right away. So the first thing I could recommend is seeking advice and understanding who that network is.
Just to add on, I agree with everything you've both said. I would say be proactive. If you're interested in management, make your aspirations known, and maybe seek out someone in HR, who HR often has their finger on the pulse of management positions that may be coming available. I agree totally about seeking out mentors. Maybe find a male or female mentor whose management style you really respect. And another kind of action item would be to stretch yourself and get involved in something beyond just your job, but maybe it's an employee resource group or something outside of your normal orb, and you can often kind of distinguish yourself there as far as a leader or, with management skills.
Thank you for that answer, and you kind of answer my next question about mentors and the importance of the right mentor or mentors. I'm a big fan of what I call the multiple mentor model. I'm trademarking that, by the way. So I basically have multiple mentors in different areas of life, and so I kind of try to get, when I get advice about something, I'll ask 3 or 4 people that I respect their opinion, and usually a pattern will emerge amongst their advice, and if there is a pattern, then I know that that's probably the way that I should go. So importance of mentors. By the way, just so everybody knows, AnitaB.Org will be doing a mentorship series in Q3. We're partnering with UT Austin's CS department. They are providing us with 40 mentees within their department, and we are providing them with 40 mentors. If anybody is interested in providing mentorship to these young ladies, please let me know. Next question. So according to a 2015 Gallup report based on 4 decades of research, found that female managers outperform male managers when it comes to employee engagement. Now, I read a lot about how supposedly, allegedly, it is difficult to retain millennials within a particular company for more than 2 years. Do you think that if we had more female managers, we might be able to retain millennials? Fringe question.
I don't know if we'll answer the question exactly, but I think that every manager has different styles, and at the end of the day, every employee also is different. And so I think understanding that individualization is really critical, and especially with younger generations like millennials. I think I'm not far from that edge of the generation cutoff, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you're male or female. I think if you truly understand that people are different and to tap into different ways, and your approach can't be one size fits all, I think that's ultimately one of the things that shines through as being a manager that's most important.
I would add to that, I don't think staying for 2 years at one job is a millennial characteristic. I think it's a modern characteristic. And when you look at companies like Facebook and Google, they have an average, they put out a number around the average amount of time that employees stay at those companies, and I think they're both less than 2 years. And so it's not necessarily a millennial characteristic. I think it's, kind of more of a modern workplace. Yeah.
One thought on employee engagement. There's a terrific Harvard Business Review article And I think the title is something like, if your boss thinks you're awesome, you're probably awesome. But it's a study that they did where it showed that managers who, kind of sing their employees' praises and typically give positive feedback, they do drive higher engagement and more motivated employees versus managers who are always nitpicking and finding kind of what's wrong, the negative. You often see, lower levels of engagement, demotivation. It's very well worth a read. And I think the takeaway there is as a manager, to drive engagement, whether you're male or female, you can still give constructive feedback for sure, but kind of taking that more positive road can often get more out of a team than, the alternative.
I probably should have developed that question a little bit more. But the Gallup report seems to indicate that the female managers were more engaged themselves. I don't know how they quantify that. And as a result, they were engaging their employees more through consistent feedback and through consistent coaching, which according to a number of articles that I've read are two things that millennials are looking for in the workplace. So that was where that question came from. Now, we touched a little bit on the importance of programs that corporations run in order to groom their employees for the management or executive track. Can you speak to us a little bit about what programs you've been through?
I think all three of us have been through an executive accelerator program that was sponsored by RetailMeNot and was an excellent program, which was kind of a 6-month after-hours experience, kind of prepping women for executive roles, if you will, management roles. And every month you kind of tackle a different topic, whether it's negotiation or how to manage a P&L. And it's not necessarily meant to set you up as like the next CEO, but more just kind of giving you the confidence and the familiarity with topics that come up quite a bit in management.
Yeah, that program that Laura spoke about was pretty pivotal, at least for me. The material, if anything, gave great space to think and reflect about the situation and maybe what's going on with the current business and how what you're learning about a P&L or about how to negotiate might actually apply back to our business. Additionally, there became an opportunity for mentorship and then again a network to ask questions. I'm looking at Michelle because we went through the program together. But so Michelle ended up being a great network partner for me. And so I think, again, reaching out to people that you respect, that you admire, I think is very critical to tap them for information, tap them for advice and about either a situation. Maybe it's a specific business question, but maybe it's also, how do I start doing these things? What's the first step?
So speaking of negotiation, another shameless plug, AnitaB.Org will be hosting a talk on how to negotiate salary and promotions on March 28th. This is going to be an online lunch and learn type of situation. So if you're interested in signing up for that, please get on our meetup page. Look us up under AnitaB.Org Austin, and you'll be able to find us there. So next question. What was the transition like from individual contributor to first-time manager?
I I'm excited to actually answer this question. I personally was in a situation where I was on a team of one of many, and so I was moving from a peer-to-peer situation to a peer-to-manager situation, and that was really challenging. And I would argue that maybe sometimes more challenging because of the personal relationships and rapport that you have with your team members than it would be to come in from the outside in as a new manager. So my transition was difficult and delicate, and I didn't want to offend anyone. I also was trying to figure this whole management thing out, and if anything, it took me a long time to really establish that relationships in a new way as a manager instead of as a peer. And I think if I had to give any advice to the audience, if you find yourself in the situation, let it take time. It's going to eventually sort itself out, and it will be great.
For me, unfortunately, the first person I ever hired was also the first and only person I've ever had to fire. And so it was a little bit a rocky start. But ever since then, I think I learned a lot from that. And part of being a manager, it's as important to know who not to hire as it is to know who to hire. And so I'm happy to say that my track record since then has been batting 1,000. But yeah, it was hard.
I think for me, the biggest kind of change was going from individual contributor, where you're really striving to shine and prove, the results of your efforts and make a mark, to managing is really that shift you make around letting others succeed and that kind of servant mentality, which as a manager I truly believe in. Google recently did a study, a few years ago, where they surveyed all of their managers and employees, and they found that the single most effective factor among managers was those who took the time to invest in their employees' personal and professional success. And that's just a jump, right, from individual contributor, where you're really focused on, your own success, to suddenly kind of nurturing and focusing on helping others succeed. And often I think my greatest success is seeing someone, go beyond where I am. Like that to me is the ultimate kind of mark that I've done a good job.
The student surpasses the master, right?
Thank you. Better put.
Everybody? Okay. So we're down to the point where we're going to do audience Q&A. And Michelle, if you ever want to do a talk on how to hire, best practices for hiring, more than happy to host that. There's so many hiring managers that are in a state of fear whenever they're hiring people. So does anybody have any questions? You're going to make me walk all over there. Okay.
Thank you. You touched on finding success in helping other people be successful. So coming from, what were you doing before as an individual contributor?
In product management. Product management. I was a product manager.
Okay, so I would be coming from an engineering background. I have a lot of friends who do analytic type work. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to know how to go from finding success in very tangible things to having metrics that aren't maybe not so measurable. And how did you kind of retrain your mind to be happy with the results then?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think being in a digital environment, there are always going to be metrics, whether you're managing or not. But I think it's balancing both like the happiness of the team that you're managing, and are they fulfilled by what they're doing, and then how successful are they? Like, are they having an impact on the business? And so, maybe it becomes more you're bubbling up the metrics that from the fruits of their effort. I don't know. Do you have?
I would also add that I think you have to it's easy to measure metrics because you can see them. And I think that when you start to move into different ways to measure things that are softer, that you have to be more creative in a way. And you have to be willing to, I'll tell you my experience, and one of my bosses is in the room, so she might know this, I always wanted to search for the numbers, and I always wanted to find the KPI that I could measure something, but at the end of the day, that wasn't really a key success metric. And the impact that you end up making that was softer is sometimes hard to quantify, but there is still business results behind it. And so I think I guess my advice in the situation was not to seek a specific hard KPI, but maybe think and go to the drawing board a little bit and outline what success might look like. And so maybe it's more milestone based. Maybe it's a completely different result that you're seeking that isn't necessarily an improvement in a metric or something like that.
Hey, first of all, thank y'all so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. My question, I want to touch more on your transition from a team and peer-to-peer into that managerial role, and that you said it was very delicate. And you also mentioned that it took time. So through that time, like, what all did you learn? What are things you could have learned faster? And then what feedback would you give to us as we try to navigate that as managers?
Yes. What could have I learned faster was that it was going to take time. And actually, this is another piece of advice. I think you have to also understand what your strengths are. And at the time, I knew one of my strengths was being an activator, and I'm a go. If I see a problem, I'm going to fix it person. And so one of the mistakes I made was trying to maybe fix things too soon instead of listening and really truly trying to understand what the problems were. And once I realized, again, it took time, that I needed to actually sit and listen instead of having all the answers or maybe solving people's problems, that ended up becoming more meaningful for the employee themselves. Because at the end of the day, there were so many different people, so many different needs, and I tried to jump too soon into trying to solve their problems without actually understanding them first. So that's my biggest lesson, I think.
Did anybody else have any more questions? I think there are 30. Oh. Last question is by Andy Stalick.
We're good. Hi. I'd love to hear more about how you negotiate the transition and decision-making process between remaining in IC and maybe moving up the IC career ladder if you saw prospects there, versus moving into the management track. First of all, did you consider that there were prospects up the IC ladder, or that maybe you needed to move into management to advance your career or not? I'd love to hear more about that switchover point.
I personally started as a very strong IC for a long time, then was tapped to become a manager, and then most recently, in the past year, actually became more of an IC contributor, even though I was a manager at the same time, but my team size drastically changed. So I was able to become more of an IC again. And I think it's, to what Laura was saying earlier, going back and forth, those are two very different mindsets. And as far as advancement goes, I think ultimately trying to understand what's important to you and understanding, again, your strengths and then what your weaknesses are, where you maybe need help and struggle, might end up yielding itself one way more than another. And so again, if I had to try to put that into advice, I would say, if you don't know what your strengths are, there's a great book, Strength Finder 2.0, that will help, and it's a short quiz, 15 minutes or so, that will help give you tools and resources to understand what that is, and then if that skill set may lie in one track or another. And if anything, life is going to be more of a balance, especially in your professional career. You might have to wear both hats at the same time.
Yeah, I think too, I fully anticipate that I'll go back to being an IC one day. Like, there are things about both roles that are so appealing. And I think we're lucky today. There are more ways. For example, in product, you can be for a principal product manager, which is a really nice way to continue to hone your product, craft and not be in management. And so, my guess is there's similar things in engineering. And I think that if you have ever kind of flirted with the idea of management, I recommend, trying it and seeing. And it doesn't mean that you're suddenly on this kind of inexorable path where you can't get off. Again, I've flitted back and forth, and the one thing for me, the measure of a good job is, am I learning? And so both routes have been incredibly fulfilling in that regard.
I'll add to that. I think for me, when I made the move from IC to management, it was with a role change at a new company. But I knew I wanted to take that path because in a marketing role, I wanted to be able to scale my efforts. And so what I've learned since then is that, as a manager, you become more of a teacher than an executor. And so that's something that I actually really, really love about management. And so I think if you like teaching, I think you would like managing.
I also had one more thought related to Parlay. I think there's an IC, an individual contributor ends up being specialized or can be specialized, and ultimately the career path becomes more and more specialized and likely more and more narrow, but very deep. And I think the management path is the inverse of that, and then it ends up being more and more horizontal, and you have to know just a little bit about everything, but not necessarily go very deep in certain things. And so I think in those two situations, if you understand within yourself which ones you prefer, or those situations, they may lean itself one way or another, and then there are instances where you can do both.
Are there any more audience questions? Because I've got one more. We've got time for one more. So, what role did male allies play in your careers thus far?
They're very important, and equally as important as female. I would say my ally right now is a male and happens to be my boss that I have a great relationship with. I think they're critical because everybody's going to have a different perspective. And if you can interpret a situation one way, they might interpret a situation a different way. And I think it's just always valuable. I think, Giselle, you also mentioned having 4 or 5 different mentors in your...
And a lot of them are males.
Yes. Yeah. So again, value of different perspectives, I think, is important.
Agreed.
Michelle agrees.
I agree with that. I will say I have been most inspired by female leaders, and so while it's super important to have male allies, and that's just the reality. Like men are for the most part in the positions of power, and we're changing that. But for me, like, I worked at a company called All Recipes, which was largely run by women. The president of the company was a female, and she had this uncanny ability as a leader to tap into people's individual strengths. So far from like the one size fits all, she was able to look at her team and say, kind of suss out really quickly what they were extremely good at and bring that out. So rather than kind of try to transform someone, she released what was best. And that was so inspiring to me. And that was what ultimately pushed me back into the management direction. Because if you're like me, I'm sure everyone in this room has had a bad manager. And I've gone through a few myself. And when I experienced, you know, such a great leader, such a great manager, it made me want to go in that direction and see, could I emulate that in, you know, some small form.
Thank you to our panel. Thank you for taking the time to answer our questions and be vulnerable and all of that with your careers. Thank you. I should mention there's food and drinks in the back. Please feel free to take some of that. I don't want to take it all home. Oh, thank you. This was fun.